You ever think about your life? You're just like, oh, I'm getting flown into Warzones, and I know Neil Young, and I'm having lunch with Neil Young.
I don't. I don't think of it like that. I think of myself mostly as a failure. But that's just imposter syndrome.
That's imposter syndrome talking
Yeah,
right there.
yeah, exactly.
Imposter syndrome is better than Dunning-Kruger. So,
Yes, I definitely don't experience Dunning-Kruger.
welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I am with Joshua Dysart. Hey, Joshua.
Hi, nice way to hit that Y. I love it. How are you?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing over there?
I'm good, man. Yeah, everything's cool.
So let's just get right down to it. You started working in comics with a comic called Violent Messiahs.
Yeah.
And then you also worked in Vertigo for a while over there. You
Yeah.
did Unknown Soldier. Yeah, you did Unknown Soldier, and you did what was the one?
Swamp Thing.
You did Swamp Thing. I really should have pulled up your your Wikipedia here
No way.
before I started
It's
talking to
better
you.
this way. I like it.
Yeah.
I like because who needs all that? I don't want you to do any work before you come into the phone call. That's no fun. Yeah, I did. And then there was between I did some kind of whatever work I could get my hands on between Violent Messiahs and Vertigo.
Mhm.
So it wasn't a straight shot, but yeah, that was it. And Swamp Thing was my first ongoing series.
How was working on Swamp Thing like, knowing the whole legacy of people who have
It's
worked on
absolutely
that title?
terrifying. It's just awful. It's really hard. And I really do feel like Mark Millar, his run should probably be the last Swamp Thing run. So I didn't really feel like ours was necessary, but it it's it's an amazing legacy to be a part of, and I got to work with Enrique Breccia, and so it was a wonderful experience, but it's really scary.
It's nice to know that even you guys have problems pronouncing each other's names.
Yes, exactly. That's right. You're not in this alone. That's right. I have no idea how Mark's last name is pronounced.
So, and then another thing that I noticed in your work, especially starting with something like Unknown Soldier, you wrote that in a conflict zone.
Well, yeah, I didn't write it entirely in a conflict zone, but I did go do research in northern Uganda in 2007 during a ceasefire between the UPDF and the LRA. Yeah.
And so there's a whole theme in your work about outsiders, people who don't belong, people who don't belong in society or don't feel like they belong. What drives you to that kind of thing?
Well, that's really interesting because that you mention it. I guess that is true, but I would not have instinctively thought about it. So I don't have like a canned answer for what drives me to the outsider, but I do think we're all looking for a collective, a positive collective communal experience. So if something separates you from the community, either that's because of the prejudices of the community or something inside of you, I can see how that's a real rich well for drama because of how it can really, because it hurts. It hurts to be separate from the collective. Even with in my country with our American individualism, I think we're still really always yearning for connectivity and the collective. And so I think that's really interesting. The person who is ostracized or outside of that thing that we're desperate to have.
On the first volume of The Unknown Soldier, right there on the cover, there is a testimonial by Garth Ennis, who is probably the guy I think of when I think of modern war comics.
Yes, of course.
And so how does that feel, getting that kind of endorsement from somebody like Garth Ennis?
So it's really amazing. Garth is a really big influence on me. I think Garth is really interesting because he's a profound humanist. It's really, you see it in his work, and yet he's also makes very extreme creative decisions. And I and so I think sometimes he gets misread as a brutalist or a nihilist, but you can really see that he loves people and he's disappointed in people because he loves them and they never really show up. We don't really show up to our better instinct. So Garth has always been a big influence on me, and that was really, really special. And especially because he had done he did the previous Unknown Soldier miniseries. So it was nice for him to sort of give us the nod and say that what we were doing is interesting and deserved to be in the legacy, the conversation of Unknown Soldier.
Well, so what was it like, doing a comic in that late 2010s era? No,
Yeah.
sorry, that late 2000s era,
Yeah.
about something that was happening in that early 2000s era. Were you
Well, the
afraid that
thing was,
it was going to be dated by the time it came out, or?
yeah, well, it's not so much that it's dated, it's that you don't have enough um, space on it. It's a very ethically tricky situation to tell fictions about events that are impacting real people right now. The the way that time softens us from historical fiction is really useful, if we, because we don't really have to be all that ethical about people who lived in the 6th century when we're in our storytelling. You know what I mean? Like, we don't owe them a whole lot. Whereas a human being who is alive today, and we're telling about an experience that happened during the absolute worst moments of their lives, there is an ethical responsibility you have as a storyteller there. And I have always maintained that there might be something unethical at the very heart of Unknown Soldier, just the fact that it exists. But what happened was, as we were going to release the book, even though the book takes place in 2002, in 2007, Operation Lightning Strike happened, which was a military operation where a 3-nation attack on the Lord's Resistance Army reactivated the conflict on the DRC side of Acholi land, Uganda.
Mhm.
And so all of a sudden we were back and this happened almost the month that we released the first issue of the book. So there was I guess on the one hand, you are definitely being in the moment more so than you could have ever predicted. On the other hand, who are you to use this real world ongoing conflict for your fictions? You know what I mean? Like, what? So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really.
That's it's like the relevance came back, but you'd rather it didn't.
Yes, yes, exactly. The more distance we had on it, but we always knew there was never it really. It's disingenuous to say there was ever any distance. While I was there, people were still living in internal displacement camps. The their land was all landmined from the conflict. You couldn't go, and so there was a lot of problems. A dominant amount of the community was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. Almost everyone had either witnessed or acted in, or been involved in the killing of another person. It was a really horrible, disruptive thing for this community. And at that point, when I was there, the LRA leadership had retreated to Juba, Sudan, which is now Juba, South Sudan. This is before South Sudanese independence. To Juba, Sudan, and they had sort of left a lot of their combatants, many of which were what we would call like child combatants, under the age of 16. And they just sort of had left them to their own devices in northern Uganda, which was causing all kinds of problems while I was there. There was an attack on a World Food Program truck that killed a World Food Program driver while I was in that area. These were kids trying to get their hands on food. So the area was very destabilized when I was there. So it's not really entirely fair to say that the conflict was in the past. You know what I mean? The long shadow of that conflict was very much still cast across Acholi land when I was there.
You've been talking factually about your experience in Uganda as you know you're researching this comic.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like emotionally? Like,
Yeah.
how do you feel being there?
So that was my first time. I had been in central Mexico in the mid '90s when during the Chiapas revolution uprising occurred. But that was my first real time to actively go into a destabilized community to try to be an observer. And I think, and since then, I was in Iraqi Kurdistan in 2014. I was back in East Africa and South Sudan in 2016. So I now can identify what was happening to me then, and that is you sort of really, and I imagine I've talked to some journalists about this, you really emotionally shut down while you're there because you see a lot of really terrible things, and you are extremely privileged because you have I didn't actually helicopter in, but you basically helicoptered into these people's lives, and they have to live here, and I can extract myself whenever I want. So the guilt of that, the overwhelming sort of emotional fatigue of being privileged in that situation, and then witnessing it, what everybody is going through, has a profound effect on you. But while you're on the ground and you're setting up 3 interviews a day and you're traveling huge distances to meet with people and you're getting deeper and deeper into the situation, I feel very emotionally removed because that's how you do the job. Otherwise, you're like, you just want to, you cry or and sometimes you do. Sometimes you're listening to a story and the person telling, and it's it's the worst thing you've ever heard in your life. And the person who lived it is in front of you. And, so you have, and you cry. But for the most part, you're really sort of focused on just getting the job done. And then what happens is, in my experience, is then I come back to the States and I come to Los Angeles where people are driving like $100,000 cars and they're taking Instagram photos of their food or whatever. And that's when it becomes really emotionally intense because you hate your culture, you hate, and it's nobody's fault. Like every culture is it's all subjective to what you experience in your life, but that's when the emotions really hit, I think, when you come back, not so much when you're on the ground, because you have a job to do.
Yeah,
you have to maximize your time and you have to be strong in the face of these people's stories. So
I was gonna say, like, when you come back, there's the thing that you hate about your culture, the fact that they're just unaware of the privilege that they have.
Yeah, and also, there's we're getting really deep real fast. I'm so sorry about that, but there's this.
No, this is why I messaged you.
Oh, awesome, cool. There seems to be a knot between progress and violence, right? I've never really been able to fully verbalize this, but it's in my work a lot. And this notion that for us, the United States, so for my country, we're 5% of the global population. At this rate, we're, I think, consuming, let's say 25% of the global resources. I mean, I think it's pretty close to 25% of global resources. So while we absolutely have abject poverty in this country, the overall access to to resources is compared to many places around the world is like incredible. It's insane. I mean, and so that's where the anger comes from, is like, can there only be in America a quality of life at this level if there is also an East Africa? Like, does it cost, you know what I mean? Like, when you're such a small part of the global population, you're consuming so much of the global resources, aren't you really to blame when another country can't hang on to its resources, or when another country lives under bombs because of political destabilization, or so that's where the real anger and guilt comes from, I think.
So with your work, are you hoping to kind of get the word out there about what your role as a country should be?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe not as a country, but because, I feel more human than I feel American. But
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I think that ultimately what I want to do is I want to I want to take situations that my readers maybe have not been able to observe or had access to the way that I have, and that and then I want to create a universal human empathy. So when you look at a South Sudanese farmer, uh, in my book Living Level 3 South Sudan, you follow the lives of these South Sudanese farmer who's lost their land to famine. I want you to say, you living in Santa Monica, California, I want you to say, oh my God, what if I had to pick up my child and a few things that I could carry, and I had to leave Santa Monica and I had to walk to Long Beach? I want you to think about what that really means. And this way we hopefully create an empathy engine, and then people begin to care about things outside of their world. And being an American, I live in a very culturally isolated and to a certain degree culturally xenophobic country.
Yeah, I was gonna say, speaking about, getting people to care, how's 2020 treating you?
Yeah. I mean, it's my wife is a medical professional. She works at a hospital, so it's a little bit stressful, but there are places where it's way worse. And both her and I are fortunate to be employed at a time when a lot of people aren't. And so far we've been okay. Yeah. But 2020, man, it's like it feels like the starting gun to the apocalypse. Really, I mean, I'm trying to be optimistic, but
It's the most optimistic thing you can say. It's kind of depressing about.
yeah, I know exactly.
Yeah, you mentioned living level 3, so you have done a couple of comics for the World Food Program,
Yeah.
and once again for the one in Iraq, and as well as for the one in South Sudan, you went there. You did
Mm-hmm.
research there.
Mm-hmm.
What drives you to do all this hardcore primary research in these countries? A lot of people would just be happy, like, doing Zoom calls and.
Yeah. Well, I think that there just isn't. Well, first of all, you only tell these stories because people who are living the experience don't have the access in that moment to tell the story themselves. So the first thing you want to make sure you're doing by going there is making sure there's not a voice on the ground who has the time and the space and the access to tell that story. Because the point is not to co-opt somebody else's narrative, not to co-opt a Kurdistani narrative or Dinka narrative. So that's your first reason for going there, is to make sure you're really hearing the voices so that they can come through you and not just you, as best as you can. I mean, we're all sort of isolated in our reality tunnels, but so that's step one. And then step two is, I think thematically, you can Google research all day long, but you're putting in terms into Google and you're getting an algorithmic feedback, and you'll never get out of your bias. You know what I mean? You're stuck in your biases. When you're on the ground, the truth is happening in front of you, and the people are telling you the truth, and you still may drag your biases into it, but it's way more difficult. And I think that more so than making sure you get the stories right, more so than making sure that you have the feel of the location right, the very place changes the very bones of your story. So Unknown Soldier, I expected to be a war book, but once I was there and spending time with civilians who had experienced conflict, my obsession and what that book is really about became about civilians enduring war. And in fact, ever since that trip to Uganda, that's been my central theme. is human beings who are devalued by politics and society and losing everything, which I guess now that I think of it plays back to your outsider theme, right? They're totally devalued. And that's what a civilian in a war zone is. They're completely devalued. They're just a piece of meat caught up in this horrible thing. And so that came from me being on the ground, talking to civilians every day, going to Iraq, going to South Sudan. You just really will never even begin to understand the situation until you're on the ground. And even then, you know, I mean, I spent 2 weeks in South Sudan. It's not, you don't really know anything. It's still a superficial and shallow understanding, but it's the best you can do. So,
like you only see the surface, but
yeah, exactly. I mean, you'll never really know what it means to live your life in South Sudan and to have seen independence come to the country, to have migrated, you know, the government gave away all this land, to have had all those hopes and those dreams, that to be the youngest democracy on the planet, the youngest new country on the planet, the future of the continent of, or at least of sub-Saharan Africa, and then to have it go so poorly because your leadership is fighting for power, and then a civil war breaks out, and you're just trying to live your life and raise your children and improve their lives, and then a famine hits in the middle of a civil war, and then and it's all fate. You've done nothing wrong. You're just a dude and your wife and your children, and you're just, you know, and so to really understand that, yeah, you have to go there and at least, you know, at least spend 10 days in the country. It's the least you can do if you're going to tell those stories.
I have to ask, are these projects you seek out, or are you tapped for them?
Well, so, you know, Unknown Soldier was one where Vertigo, Karen Berger, was asking for a revamp of Unknown Soldier. And I pitched this conflict that I was aware of between the LRA and the UPDF and in northern Uganda. And my pitch was, it's an unknown war, you know, an unknown soldier for an unknown war. That's my pitch. But then when they greenlit it, I really began to feel the ethical weight of it, like what we talked about. And that's when I decided to go. But the United Nations project, at that point, it had been almost 10 years, not quite 10 years, since I had been in East Africa the first time. And I really missed being in the world. And I really missed, I just feel like if something is happening, we all have to witness it or feel it, you know, otherwise there won't be change. As long as people can hide from horrible things, then people won't do anything to help anybody. So I wanted to get back involved in that work, and the United Nations World Food Program was looking for someone to do that, and I like petitioned to get the gig. So a little bit of both. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you're basically that guy now.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, not so much anymore. You know, we ran out of funding on the WFP gig. Didn't run out, but you know, we sort of finished it. I think we wanted to do one more trip. It didn't work out. And then I helped a couple of friends start a nonprofit in Pakistan that brought young creative people who were making their own comics to San Diego Comic-Con, so they could, like, we gave away like thousands of comics 3 years ago at San Diego Comic-Con. Brought these young Pakistani students who are making comics, and I was really enjoying that, and that had me going to Pakistan, and that was awesome. But the State Department was paying for that because it was part of an anti-radicalization program that the U.S. State Department was involved in, a culture exchange. And, you know, and we have a new administration now, you may have heard, a new presidential administration, and they don't invest in that kind of thing. They don't like it when people have a voice or whatever, or get to participate in the conversation. So
that's a good that's a good way to describe that catch-all term.
Yes,
that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. They don't really like it when you try to lift people up and give. Yeah. Yeah, it's not their bag, man.
No, hopefully that'll be solved in a couple of months, though.
Well, we'll see. It's very stressful. I don't really have any faith in my fellow countrymen, so we'll see.
I'll tell you, it's stressful to hear it from here.
Yes. Yeah, because it affects the whole world. This guy, you know what I mean? Like,
It really does.
yeah.
Um, okay. And here's another thing that I noticed. In Violent Messiahs, your main character is Lieutenant Cherry Major, who's a woman.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Swamp Thing, your main character is a man made out of a swamp.
Yes.
Unknown Soldier, your main character is Dr. Moses Lwanga,
Yeah.
a black guy from Africa, from Uganda.
Yeah. But like, I would say if we're being, I would say he's actually African American because he's like culturally American, and that's part of his internal crisis, right? He's born in East Africa, but taken as a young boy to the States, educated in the States, and on the one hand, he has shame about not being raised with his people. On the other hand, he has a sort of American superiority complex about his education. Which to be the truth of it is there are some amazing educational facilities in East Africa and in Uganda, actually. One of the older, really impressive colleges are there. But he's kind of he doesn't want to be, but he's sort of a typical American. He's like brutish.
It's the culture that he brings over there.
Yeah, exactly. He's a colonizer. He's been colonized and he's a colonizer. Yeah.
There is a thought to that colonizers, the people who have been colonized have the mentality of colonizers when they've.
Yes, absolutely. The abused becomes the abuser. That's just the cycle of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a running theme in a movie in Black Panther, the movie, which is clearly on my mind because of what happened this weekend.
But I cut you off. I was interested in hearing where you were going. You were mentioning these primary protagonists and what they're.
One of the characters that you're known for at Valiant is Faith.
Yes.
And of course, with Greendale, you've got Sun Green. Mm-hmm. Do you consciously write people who aren't white men?
Probably. This is interesting. I was thinking about this, looking back on my work. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super interested in white dudes, man. I mean, it's interesting because my family on my mother's side is from Mexico. And so my grandmother was the assimilator, right? She was like the white sister. Whenever she was the one who passed for white, she had like the most Castilian blood or whatever, and the Gonzaleses. And so she began assimilating us. So we're the only branch of my family on my mother's side that is white. Everybody else is, all my cousins, everybody is kind of puro Mexicano culture, And so I never really hung out with that many white dudes. And in fact, I sort of remember it wasn't until like maybe junior high or high school where I like realized I was in a room of all white men. And it was a very different experience. So I don't think I understand that I am that. I certainly show as that. I certainly receive all the privilege of that and all the, but I'm not interested in that very much. So, but that creates a problem, right? Then you're always writing something that you're inherently not, that you can't access. So it takes a lot of just sort of like listening and trying to get it right and hoping you don't fuck it up.
Do you think that plays into the whole fact that you end up writing about people who are outsiders and this emotionally displaced?
Maybe so. Yeah, there's a really good chance of that. Yeah, I think so. Because I sometimes I feel a little bit like even robbed of my own culture. Like I love my family. I don't know anyone on my father's side of my family that they've all passed away, including my half brother, who was younger than me. So I only have my mom's family, and they're amazing, and they're fun, and I love them. And I'm the white guy, in the family. And so I think even in the family, I'm sort of a little bit, outside of it. So, so yeah, maybe it's interesting.
That's because I didn't know that about you going into this interview. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, South Texas, it's very common. We're all sort of, it's occupied Mexico,
yeah.
really. So it's all very common to have Mexican in you.
Okay, let's talk about Greendale,
Okay.
which is so full
Your
disclosure,
jam.
Greendale's my favorite work of yours.
Awesome. Thank
Absolutely
you.
love it.
Thank you.
And one of the reasons for that is because I actually have a real passion for music-based comics.
Mm-hmm. Me
You
too.
worked with a legend,
I
Neil
did.
Young.
Yes.
What is
True.
Neil Young like?
He's cool, man. He's a cool guy. He's pretty chill. He doesn't really, he's a rock star. That is undeniable. But he doesn't. But he's open-minded, and we were able to fight. Like we'd have disagreements about where the book should go, and he listened to me, and so he was a good guy. He was a really cool cat, actually, and he's an amazing musician. The night that I met him, and we went backstage at the Hollywood Bowl for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young show to meet him, and so everybody was there, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and he was pretty chill. He looked a little tired. His whole family was there. His wife at the time was there. His one of his kids. And it was really neat to meet everybody, and we talked about the story, and he listened. I told him my take on the story. He listened and kind of dug it, and his wife, I think, really dug it. But he said, I gotta go take a nap before the show, and this was the first time I met him, and he looked pretty tired. He looked a little old. And then we went outside and we got our seats that we were fortunate enough to be given, and then he came out, and he was a total rock star. He was amazing. All of that, like all the years that that was gone. He was amazing on stage. And so that was a really interesting thing to witness, the transformation of that. But yeah, as a creative partner, he was awesome. He was really great. I spoke to him on the phone probably throughout that process, I guess 4 or 5 times. We met in person 3 times, I think, at different hotels and restaurants. And it was awesome. It was a blast. And Cliff Chang drew it.
You ever think about your life? You're just like, oh, I'm getting flown into Warzones, and I know Neil Young, and I'm having lunch with Neil Young.
I don't think of it like that. I think of myself mostly as a failure. But that's just imposter syndrome.
That's imposter syndrome talking right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Imposter syndrome is better than Dunning-Kruger. So
yes, I definitely don't experience Dunning-Kruger.
So with Greendale, this was a concept album that Neil Young did, and he it told the story of the town of Greendale, and specifically Sun Green, and he actually had it adapted into a short movie and a stage play, if I'm right.
Yeah, it was his big multi-platform project.
Why was the story of each platform not exactly the same?
Well, I cannot speak for any of the other, I wasn't involved in the stage play or the movie, but I knew that I didn't want to just sort of regurgitate. The movie had already, both of those entities already existed. We were kind of the last attack on the material because you had the album and the stage play. So I knew that we just wanted to do something totally different. I thought it's kind of exciting that if you encounter the Greendale concept, that Neil Young concept, in each different medium, it's a whole different take on the same concept. And that's really exciting to me. I think that's really cool. And I just figured, since we were Vertigo, since Karen Berger put this project together and she was editing it, that our take would be to firmly make it a Vertigo book. Just really like, it very much speaks to a kind of late 90s, early aughts Vertigo, so yeah, so I really had I always like to write for an audience member. And in that one, I had 2 audience members. It was Karen Berger and Neil Young. So what you get from Greendale is like Karen Berger and Neil Young like smashed together into a single person. Yeah.
Do you ever think about your life, Karen Berger and Neil Young?
No, I never think about my life. Not like that. But I mean, I guess it's true for that moment.
Like you're describing it and my mind is blowing up.
Yeah. Well, the truth of it is I was just like, you know, being torturing myself and you know, I mean, it sounds glamorous, but it's a lot of like being alone in a room late at night making shit up and hoping it doesn't suck.
I'm assuming that when you say the vertigo elements, you mean the more magical realism, fantasy type elements. So,
yeah, which is brought up, you know, in the source material. There's also the book. I don't know if you've ever seen the art book.
No, I haven't seen the art book.
It's pretty cool. The truth is much of what we did in the graphic novel has a sort of source material in the art book, more so than anything else, because in there, Neil writes a bunch of texts about a sort of causal magic, like, right? Like a kind of a early American folk faith system. And so we used a lot of that vibe for the material.
One thing that the level of fantasy that is in that book, like really jived with me because it feels like it actually is the kind of fantasy level that I think Filipinos believe in. It's like just certain people have certain skills and certain skills, and some of them can be unexplainable. So, but do you think to an American audience was that unbelievable or?
Well, I think, you know, it definitely gets, I mean, you know, a lot of how we view mythic structures have through media have sort of merged all over the world, you know, and particularly like Eastern mythic structure and Western mythic structures and realism have definitely through media, you know, converged. So, but I do think that the basis, that book, the shape of magic in that book is really interesting, or the shape of the fantasy, right? It starts pretty grounded in physical, in a very, like I said, like folk magic sort of way. Like, for instance, the salve that Sun's, you know, grandmother puts like on her skin that causes her to have her vision, right? That's a very old folk way to travel, whether it's hallucinogenic mushrooms or whatever, right? It's a very common way. I think you see it all over the world. Shamans and seers using some sort of external chemical, right? So that's a very typical way to handle it. But then we do ramp up to an almost I can't speak to the Filipino myth structure, but an almost Eastern myth structure of like you said, you know, each person, like a person's in charge of water and a person is in charge of the land. And that's also, of course, we see that in indigenous American subcultures, and we see it in very old Proto-Germanic Norse cultures. So it gets very, I guess, global in its myth structuring. So I don't know if Americans relate to it or not, but I think it's cool. That's my answer to the question after rambling.
Was how difficult was it to kind of take an album and make a story out of it? I mean, granted, it was an album that already had a story, but
yeah, I mean, it definitely helped, like you said, that each song was sort of a serialized event in a story. It's not quite as tight a storyline as an album, so there was a lot of work that had to be done, kind of just stitching it together into a cohesive thing. And but I think comics are a lot like music, so I don't find it that difficult. Yeah, I think comics have a rhythm and a sort of a, I didn't find it that difficult, really. I mean, you had said earlier that you're really interested in comics about music, and I agree. I think there's something really powerful about the fact that we don't have any sound, and yet we're trying to convey rhythm, and we do it, you know, visually, and we do it tonally, and I think it is, and I think it's really cool. So I really enjoyed that process, and I didn't find it that difficult, to be honest. There were parts of the book that were difficult, but the converting of the story or from the album wasn't really one. And you can even, like, pace scenes. Like if one song is much more of a rock and jam, you can like build that scene to be a little bit more, intense and a little bit more straightforward. And if a song is melancholic, you can create a melancholic scene. There's just so much more information to inspire you. So it's actually a gift to have that source material. It's not a hindrance.
I see you play the guitar.
Not well, but yes, I do.
Yeah. So does playing the guitar, like the way the thought process it takes to play the guitar, does it work its way into writing at all?
I think so. I think all creativity is the same. It comes from the same well, and there's certain tools that you have to learn to master or spend time with one act of creativity over another. But I think it all comes from that same place, like inspiration, energy, rhythm, tone. All these things are as important in storytelling, I think, as they are in playing the guitar. So the thing you're looking for at its source is you trying to find your flow state when you're creating, right? And that's true, I find, for me personally. I try to write my first attack on a sequence or on anything in a gush, in a rush. I try to do it in a flow state, and playing music helps you have a relationship with that flow state. My wife is a surfer. I think surfing gives her a relationship to a flow state, a kind of zen in the art of state of being. So yeah, I do think it helps. Yeah.
That's very cool, because I once interviewed an artist who's also a drummer, and I asked him the same question about drumming, and he said, "What? No."
Oh, well, he's probably.
But
I'm probably full of shit, and he's
drumming
probably
is
right.
drumming is different from guitar playing. So
I mean, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it is. Technically, mechanically, it's different. Yeah. Yes.
So it's interesting to get different answers to that kind of question. Yeah. So do you listen to any music while you're writing?
I only listen to music when I am, I probably spend about an hour of my writing day with music on. It's never music with words. I listen to a lot of ambient music when I'm doing that, or classical music. So, but it's usually near the end of my day when I'm like running out of steam and I just need some other stimuli to keep me at my keyboard, because there's so many distractions in this world. So when I start to kind of lose my juice or whatever, I'll put on something that'll be very like that'll have a real aura about it, some dark, like dark ambient or something. Yeah.
Getting back to Greendale, what are the challenges of writing a character like Sun Green, who demographically speaking is nowhere near what you are? She's a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, man. Well, it's the same challenges I have, writing every character, in that you just have to be observant, so that you can so that when the people with Sun Green's aspect, when you encounter them in your lives, some aspect of Sun Green, you're observant of them and you pay attention, and you have to be as expansive as you can be, so you can be empathic to what Sun Green wants and what she needs. And ultimately you perform a sort of magic, for lack of a better term, where you try your best to conjure Sun Green into your life, into your writing room, so that it feels like she's writing herself. And that's ultimately what you want, and it takes a long time to get there. But I think if you spend enough time with a work of fiction, you're a character that you've really thought about a lot can become real. And so that's what you're looking for. So the challenge is waiting for Sun Green to show up, a real human being to show up. Now, ultimately, it's all coming from a middle-aged white male. So there's no outside of this. It's only what's inside. So you just try to be as expansive and observant and humanist as you can be, and hope you get it right. And ultimately, you're not even really trying to get it right. like I don't, if I write a character that's not me, I'm not trying to say something about 16-year-old girls. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to get it right. I don't want anyone to read this and be like, well, he got it right. That's not the point. The point is just to use this character to explore concepts and ideas that I'm interested in. I don't think she has to be 100% a 16-year-old girl. I think she has to be universally human, and you know, and everything else is just sort of a trapping.
Sun Green in the story of Greendale basically learns how to, you know, be honest with herself and eventually becomes an activist. And you were wondering, I saw some articles that you wrote back then, wondering if it was still relevant, even as the time it came out, because it started with Iraq, right?
Yeah, right.
How do you feel about that now?
Yeah. Well, it turns out that it's always relevant, right? That empire is always going to be bombing somewhere, and youth are always going to have to find their voice and take to the streets. And some generations have a heavier responsibility to that, such as our generation, our young generation right now, who are on the streets, braving a pandemic to, you know, to make their voices heard. Like, it was a ridiculous and narrow-minded to think that 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 every generation throughout all of history wouldn't have to be what Sun Green was in that moment, you know. And what's also crazy is how little we've actually done to combat climate change, which was Sun's real issue, and how little we've done to make things better. And in fact, I mean, the politics of Greendale seem naive compared to what we're experiencing right now. So,
do you feel that the COVID pandemic is nature's answer to climate change?
I do. I mean, you know, about every century we have a big, you know, we have a big pandemic or something similar. So I think that it's potentially just a cyclical part of nature. But I do feel like we're going to be seeing more emerging diseases, more novel emerging diseases like this because of climate change. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. And, you know, I have a president who's walking around calling it the China virus or whatever, so he can play to his base. But I think that it would certainly be good politics for my side of the political spectrum if we walked around calling it the climate change virus. I think that might actually do a lot to change things. But I do fear that we're going to see a lot more of this. Yeah.
So let's lighten the mood a little.
Yes.
What's it like working with Cliff Chang?
Oh, Cliff was the best, man. He, you know, I haven't talked to him in ages. He's off being just one of the very best artists in the country, but he would call me all the time in restructured pages and restructure scenes. In the truest way, he was a collaborator because, you know, comics is the comic book page. And so if Cliff is coming in there and has a better idea for a scene, not just for what goes in the panels, but for the actual scene construction visually, then, you know, then it's going to make that book so much better. And he did that all the time. It was always great to get calls from Cliff. I miss it. It was cool. Sometimes it was frustrating because you knew you were going to have to completely rethink something that you were kind of put away, that you were working on something else, and he was going to make you rethink it. But in the end, it's all for the best, man. It's just a beautiful looking book.
Do you have a favorite image from the book?
Dave Stewart colored it and Todd Klein lettered it. It's like a crazy A-team. I don't know, man. A favorite image. I have favorite moments. I haven't cracked it in a long time, so I'd have to look at it again. But from memory, I mean, I really love, it's so silly, but it's so beautiful too. It's her climbing the redwoods.
Yeah.
It's I'm only Cliff could have sold that. You know, there's a world in which another artist makes, in which some other artist, no one in particular, but makes that book silly. You know what I mean? It's pretty romantic and silly, and it's and but Cliff, man, he's really got that subtlety and that beauty and down. So I really love that. I really love her climbing the redwoods. And I really enjoy not just a single image, but the whole sequence of her going to visit her grandmother for the first time.
Oh yeah.
I think that I'm really proud of the way we wrote that, and I think Cliff was really great with it. The grandmother's personality is really, Cliff really brings it out. It's really sweet.
And as you mentioned, Dave Stewart colored it, and
Yes.
the colors are beautiful in that book.
Yes.
And
yeah, man. Yeah, that sort of antique, like, yeah, there's sort of it's an interesting, like almost like a parchment pale to it or something. It's hard to explain, but it's really lovely.
And the greatest letterer who ever lived.
Yeah, Todd Klein. Yeah. Yeah, man.
Okay, I finished Goodnight Paradise a couple of days ago, so
awesome. Thank you for reading it.
And once again, you have the theme of the outsider. This Eddie is literally homeless.
Yes. Yeah, he has a home. It's Venice Beach, but he's definitely houseless. Yeah.
Yeah, he's houseless.
Yeah.
This guy lives in Venice Beach, which is where you live.
Yeah, not anymore, but I did while I was writing that book. I recently moved. I could no longer. Our block basically turned all into Airbnbs, and we were forced out by illegal Airbnbs. So, but yeah, it happened while I was writing it. Yeah, that's okay. But I lived there for 17 years. Yeah.
Wow, you were kicked out of 17 years because of Airbnbs?
Yeah, totally. And you know what's crazy? So my street had turned like 50% Airbnb. My building, my wife and I were the last people living in the building. Every other unit in the building was an Airbnb. And the thing about Airbnb is why they're real community destroyers is because it decreases your voter base. So Venice Beach is about a 2 mile by 2 mile square. And at the time we left, there was over 2,000 temporary rentals in that area. So 2,000 apartments removed from permanent housing. So people not living in Venice Beach, but vacationers coming to Venice Beach. So that decreases your voter base. It decreases your tax base. And when you decrease your tax base, you decrease the amount of money that goes into local education. So you're just destroying the community, basically. No one's there to vote for things that are positive for the community. No one's there to pay taxes, etc. So it was really interesting thing to see as I was writing Goodnight Paradise. And then, and then we were forced out. And it's not that big a deal. My wife and I could afford to be forced out of Venice Beach. Like, I'm not suggesting you get to live wherever you want to live forever. But if we're getting forced out, then that means generational families, particularly people of color, because there are parts of Venice Beach that were very early Black American communities in Los Angeles. Those communities are being just, decimated, forced out. If you're lucky, as in Goodnight Paradise, if you're lucky, you get a buyout for your property, and that could change your life really. But for the most part, it's just people being chased out of Venice. Yeah.
Would you say Goodnight Paradise is, the closest thing to you that you have written, considering that the setting is? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I would. Absolutely. There's no, even Unknown Soldier, which I am really proud of, even that was being molded into what the publisher needed, what the property needed, what the actual IP that is, I hate that term, but what the actual property that is Unknown Soldier needed. And Goodnight Paradise is really the first time ever that I and Alberto with me and all my other collaborators, Julia Brusco and everybody, Steve Wands and Sebastian Gerner and Z. It was the first time I ever really got to do something without any parameters. Like the publisher didn't have a parameter of what they expected it to be. There was no property that it was attached to that it had to be responsible for tonally or commercially. And I just, and it was about the community that I know the best of everywhere, of anywhere I've ever lived, even my own hometown. So yeah, it's purely of me in that way.
That's very cool. And the twist
Yeah.
of Goodnight Paradise is that it is a murder mystery, but
Yeah.
the detective is not a detective. He's Eddie, who's a
Yeah.
houseless guy.
Yeah. A person of very little personal agency. Yeah. Which makes it difficult to be a detective when you have very little personal agency. Yeah.
Very few resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, you tie it all together really well, though.
Thank you so much, man.
And that came out of TKO Studios, which is not the first time that you've helped set up a new company, a new publishing
I
company.
love doing that. Yeah. That was my second time to be part of a launch of a brand new publisher, and I love doing it. And yeah.
I see, like,
it's fun, man.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I just see that there's a lot of. It seems like you look for excitement in your career, really, right? Like, going to Warzones, starting up new companies. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get bored. The writing is only half the battle. You have to keep your life exciting, and you have to have something to write about. And being, doing new stuff and having fun is way more interesting. Like I never even really perceived it as a career, which might explain why I don't make a lot of money. But at least I'm trying to shake it up and keep it different, have different stages in my career. I think the next body of work that emerges, in a lot of ways, Goodnight Paradise is the end, or at least for now, the end of this social realism work that I started with Unknown Soldier. And now my next stage in my career is, I'm gonna kind of go in a whole different direction. So I don't want to do the same shit every day.
That's great. That is my next question. What is the next stage of your career?
Yeah. Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the works, and some of it has been delayed. All of it, to one degree or another, has been delayed because of the global pandemic. But I'm moving into a kind of horror fantasy phase, and I'm really excited for the work that's going to be coming out over the next few years. And there's a bunch of stuff in production right now. So, and it's all, I do this thing where until something gets published, I just keep rewriting it. I don't know why. I feel like I don't feel like it's out in the world or something. So I have a whole group of stories that all sort of speak thematically and tonally to one another. They're all being made by different publishers and different artists. But I just had a big bulk of time when I was producing but not releasing anything. So hopefully we'll get on the other side of this pandemic and start releasing some comics.
Are you at liberty to disclose any details about any of those?
I don't think I am. I think literally everything I'm working on has not yet been announced. I think everything that's been announced has already been published. So no, I can't talk about anything. Yeah.
Maybe we'll do this again when something's announced.
Yeah. Of course, always, whenever you like.
Okay, I got two last questions. One is about comics, and one isn't about comics.
Okay.
The one about comics is which ones of your works that we haven't mentioned yet do you feel most proud of and that people should seek out?
That we haven't mentioned yet?
Mm-hmm. Or we didn't go
what
into.
What have we not mentioned? I mean, I think the BPRD stuff is really good. I think BPRD 1946 and BPRD 1947 that I co-wrote with Mike Mignola and worked with Paul Azaceta and also Fabio Ba and Gabriel Moon. I think all that material is really good. I'm really proud of that. What else did we not mention?
We didn't really talk about Violent Messiahs or which Do you realize how many awards you've won? You've been nominated for, and like.
I have only won. I know the ones I've won. Yeah, I think so. Why are there others?
I mean, you've been yeah, you've been nominated for the Russ Manning Award, a Harvey Award, the Wizard Fan Award, a few Eisners.
Yeah.
You won the Glyph
Always
Award.
The which one?
The Glyph Award.
What was that last one?
The Glyph Comics Award.
Oh, Glyph.
Yeah.
I'm really proud of the Glyph stuff. Actually, we won a couple of Glyphs. I'm really proud of that. That's that, and I think maybe the Humanitarian Award, the Dick Giordano Humanitarian Award, are the two that I really feel like that we deserved. No, but I'm proud of. I'm really proud of. I wouldn't mind. I don't know why no one will ever give me an Eisner. I know they're stupid, but I still kind of want one. I know it's stupid. Awards are stupid.
You know, like there's so many comics out that to be nominated for an Eisner is still a big giant honor, right?
It's cool, man. And we were not nominated in the cool categories. We got like one year we got best new series. That's a big category. And then another year we were nominated for best single issue for the AK-47 issue of Unknown Soldier, which I'm extremely proud of, that Rick Beach drew. So those are good categories. And I think did Dave Johnson win for covers? I think he won an Eisner for I'm not sure about that, for doing covers.
Sure, but you just named
for Unknown Soldier.
Yeah, but you just named two amazing artists, Dave Johnson and Rick Veitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really so fortunate to I've gotten to work with amazing artists. Absolutely. Richard Corbin drew a script of mine. It's good life.
Here's my last question, and I can edit this out if you're not comfortable answering it. But would you mind telling our viewers about the time you hit on a certain Elvish princess?
Yeah, man, it's not a bad big a deal, but it is funny. Where did that come from? Is that like an old story that I told ages and ages ago?
You wrote it on Facebook. You wrote it on Facebook.
Oh,
and I laughed.
I don't even remember now. What is the actress's name? I've forgotten it now.
Liv Tyler, Steven Tyler's daughter.
That's right, Liv Tyler. That's right. Yes. Sorry, I had a brain fart.
See,
yeah.
There's this thing. You're just drawn to people in rock and roll. Like,
I know. Well, that is true. I do love me some rock and roll, man. Yeah, man. It was just many years ago. Let's see. When would this ballpark? 2005 or something. 2006, and there is an Irish pub on Main Street in Venice Beach. It's probably actually in Santa Monica. I think it's right across the state line, the city line. And yeah, man, I was just there at the bar with some friends, and I went to the bar to order a drink, and there was a very attractive person next to me. She had a hoodie up, which is a weakness of mine, is girls in hoodies. And and we talked. She was funny. We were like both waiting for our drinks, and I was having like a really good time with her. I feel like I made her laugh, and then or whatever. And then we got our drinks, and I was like, hey, I'm over here. I'm sure you're here with people. But I'm over here with some friends. If you want to come over, it'd be awesome. She's like, oh, I'm here with somebody. It's like, great. And I saw, and she was there with some beautiful dude with he had tattoos. He looked great. And way more manly than me. And and she went back to her table, and I went back to my table, and everybody at my table was completely like dumbfounded, agog, shocked. And they were like, oh my God, you've been talking to Liv Tyler for, like 5-10 minutes or whatever. And I had no idea, who she was or anything. I just thought, just another lovely person in a bar, But she was really nice and kind and sweet to me, which is nice.
So that's funny to me because that implies that you didn't even bother seeing Lord of the Rings.
I've seen the first two. I generally don't have. I think the only celebrity I've ever recognized in public was Elliot Gould, which was really exciting for me. And he's also the only celebrity I've ever bothered in public. So I'm not really very good at celebrity spot. Like I don't, something in my brain doesn't connect the face or something. I don't know. But I have seen the first two Lord of the Rings movies.
Well, Elliot Gould, he's Elliot Gould visually speaking, just kind of you're not going to mistake him for anyone else. He's Elliot Gould.
That's right, exactly. Well, and what's crazy about that celebrity spotting is that I heard his voice behind me. We were like at a breakfast place, and I heard Elliot Gould behind me, and I looked at my wife, and I said, "Is Elliot Gould behind me?" And she's like, "Yeah, he is." And I kind of leapt up. It's like, "Mr. Gould, I'm so sorry to bother you. I just want to say hey." And I told him that Little Murders is one of my favorite movies. So.
Very, very cool. Thank you for doing this interview. This is awesome.
Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.